Okay, well, we have got so much to talk about today, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. So, welcome to Magnet Culture's Workforce Webinar. It is a whole new generation, my friends. So, what adjustments are you making to keep Gen Z in your workforce? So, I'm Cara Silletto. I am the founder, president, and chief retention officer here at Magnet Culture. We are in 11 years now of serving organizations across the country to reduce unnecessary employee turnover. And I actually started the company 11 years ago as a generational expert. I happen to be one of the oldest millennials, born in 1981, but we are not the young spring chickens that we once were. So I have asked Alayna Thomas, our newest trainer on our team, although she's been with us for a while now. She is out of the Dallas, Texas area. And I've asked Alayna to come join me today on a fireside chat style webinar to really talk about Gen Z. Because, Alayna, do you mind sharing with us how old you are, when you were born?
I am 25 going on 26. I was born in 1998.
Oof, man, that is so close to the year 2000.
I know.
That is awesome. And if you get to know Alayna, it's awesome that she said, I'm 25 going on 26, because I would argue Alayna is 25 going on 36. She is so wise beyond her years. She is so just amazing and has an amazing background. Actually, Alayna has already had experience as an HR director for a small business. She already has her master's degree in management. She teaches at University of Texas, Dallas in the HR department. And so you guys, she's just absolutely amazing. And yet she was born in the late 90s and is a Gen Zer through and through. So we're going to get to hear some of that insight today to really understand, particularly how things have changed, even from the millennial mindset that we've been teaching everybody for years over to this new workforce today. So this group of Gen Z folks is under 27 years old here in 2024, as we're talking about this today, but they are shaking up the workplace and certainly demanding more organizational change. So as we have our fireside chat today, feel free to drop in any questions you have in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I'll try to monitor those as close to real time as I can, or we can do some at the end as well. Alayna and I are both on LinkedIn, so please connect with us on LinkedIn if we're not already there, if we're not already connected. And if we don't get time to answer everyone's questions today, you're welcome to reach out to either one of us on LinkedIn and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Also, for those of you who may want to share this message with some friends, we will put the recording of today's session on our YouTube page at youtube.com/magnetculture. You can find all of our past webinars there. Subscribe to our page if you haven't already, so you don't miss any future postings that we have. And within a couple of days, this playback will be available to share as well. All right. So be sure as well, if you are an organizational leader or an association event planner, be sure to stay until the end of our session today, because we have a special offer in case anybody wants to bring this generational conversation into your association event or your corporate meeting or into your leaders. We've got some special offers for you at the end. So let's dive in here. And first things first, we just want to specify here, what is Gen Z? So Alayna, I'm actually going to throw this over to you. And if you'll give us a little overview just of the time frame and just a little intro of who exactly we're talking about when we say Generation Z.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gen Z is really the group of individuals that was born post 1997. And I also would love to share our millennial age group is born 1981 to 1996. So you heard Cara say that she was born 81. I was born 98. So we're both really at the start of our generations. And you'll hear me sometimes talk about being a cusper, because that is true too. It's not meant to just be a hard cut. There are some things that we learn in that in between as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if those of you on the call sometimes feel like you're caught between two different generations, and that's what we call those cuspers, because depending on the way you were raised by your parents, your grandparents, even your first mentors, that's going to shape your mentality for sure. So, yeah. Now, when we talk today about, we may say older generations or generations who have more experience in the work world. And of course, we're talking about baby boomers and the Gen Xers who came before the millennials and the Gen Z folks that we tend to refer to as the younger generations, just based on those birth years. Okay, so let's also address an elephant in the room here, because after years of doing generational work, I still hear people say, "Oh, Cara, you're just stereotyping and you're just putting people into buckets. So why do you do that? You're just feeding the stereotypes by talking about these different labels that we put on everybody." And I have to tell you that even though, yes, there are outliers, there are groups of folks who do not fit the mold, and it's typically because of the way they were raised, but the data, it still shows that those who were raised in a similar time and a similar place, you all, okay, and I'm talking about in the US or in the Midwest, or, rural versus urban versus suburban, things like that, folks who were raised in a similar time and place. And now we've got a new component in there with socioeconomic factors of, were you raised middle class or lower or higher than that? Different things also weigh into this for sure. But the data still show that we are going to have similarities if you're raised in a similar time and place of others. So there's a reason that we do generational research, and there's a reason that we still teach about the generational mindset, because as our world shifts and our society changes, we do shift our mindset. We are a product of our upbringing for sure. So be sure, though, don't make assumptions too quickly, even though we give generalizations and we talk about the data and what that is showing. uh, be careful not to make too many assumptions, because not everybody falls into those stereotypes or into the buckets. So, Alayna, what are your thoughts?
I think that so many of us here would say that we look at trends that impact our business. And I want to make sure that you all know that this is a trend that we're talking about. We've got our newer generations joining, our new hires are who are younger, are bringing a new mindset to the workplace. So if you think that, okay, I'll follow all the other trends, but this isn't one that I'm going to follow, because you might be like some of the people who have talked to Cara and roll your eyes at our generations, I would just encourage you to think about how this can provide a good framework. Tell us a little bit about the trends that we're seeing. And if we do not follow those trends, we are going to be behind. So I hope that even being here today, you find that you are learning more and able to bring this back to your workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. The key, you all, today is keep up. Okay? Keep up. And even if you heard my generational talk, 5 years ago or whenever, and you've read articles about millennials and the millennial mindset and whatnot, Gen Z is different. So let's go there for a moment. And I'd love to get your thoughts, Alayna, on what are you seeing as the differences between millennials and Gen Z? Because, of course, you're right on that cusp. And as we've talked, I can see some millennial tendencies from you and some Gen Z tendencies. So, do you want to kind of address that for a moment?
Yeah. So when millennials first came into the workplace, a lot of you who were in the workplace or maybe are millennial would have said that this group was pretty entitled. Well, now you're looking at Gen Z and you
Yep.
are thinking, okay, I thought millennials were entitled. Our Gen Z just are intolerant of what we do here in the workplace. So I call them my sweet students at UT Dallas, and you'll hear me talk a little bit about them more soon. But what I try to remind them is that when they go into a workplace, right, they only have the exposure that they have, which is likely university setting for the students I'm talking to. Our millennials, who making the oldest millennial over 40 years old with that range that I gave you earlier of years, they've had over 2 decades, maybe about 2 decades to shape the workplace.
Yep.
They've done the hard work. They've had the hard conversations. Cara, this is you. You've done the hard work. You've
We
had the hard
did. We did. We
conversations,
pushed back.
and
We
you've
fought
made
a lot of those
such
battles for you.
change. You've made such change. And here I come into the
Yeah.
workplace not thanking you for all the work that you've done.
Aw.
So thank you for doing that. And I think of you too and millennials being more patient because you knew how long it took to make those changes
Mm,
versus our Gen Z. And I'm part of this, so I might talk negatively, but it counts, it's for me too. We're coming in and we're criticizing. We're saying, well, why is it this way? It should already be, you're still doing it that way? Why aren't you using better technology? Why aren't you making more changes? And I might add just one last thing here is that we're used to frequent, fast change in our personal academic lives as Gen Z. How we've seen technology change so rapidly, to even the amount of information that we have to know at a given time. It's expected that we can find that fast. And so we criticize these workplaces that aren't going as fast as we think.
mhm.
And I'll talk even more about this down the line, but we've got a lot of access to a lot of information and it makes us pretty confident. And that confidence can be a little bit off-putting
Yes.
if we don't talk about it the right way.
But let me just remind everybody, because you are going to get frustrated when you hear some of Alayna's examples or my examples from the younger folks coming in. Yeah, those of us who've been in the work world a while, it's like, come on, they need to pay their dues and wait their turn, and we get frustrated by that. But they don't know any other world. The Gen Z folks in particular do not know a world without smartphones, without instant access, without instant answers. And as we saw, the millennials were entitled. Now, Gen Z, of course, has this new kind of on demand generation type of mentality, wanting everything right at their fingertips. And I'll tell you, Generation Alpha, which is the next group, and that is my son, who is 9 years old. He's even worse because he has only grown up in a world with, dare I say it out loud, Alexa and Siri and all of the things that can hear us talking, and he can get answers immediately. He actually uses that multiple times a day to set timers for homework and to get answers to questions he has and different things like that. So we also just have to understand that the world has changed and we have faster access, because my son will ask me a question, I don't know the answer, and I say, I don't know, buddy. And then he goes to the internet and he gets the question. And I think, oh, I didn't even think to ask. I didn't even think to just Google it, because that's not where my brain went first. And that's where these young folks are going to go. Also about the way the work world should be operating and the fact that Gen Z has less tolerance. I want to mention a conversation I just had yesterday, you all, with some operational leaders, chief operating officer, a couple of folks on her team, and they were talking about paid maternity leave. And one new location said they didn't even have a maternity, paternity, parental type of leave at all in place. They were a newer business that just hadn't come up in that situation. And then, there was some battle between the organizational leader or the local leader versus the corporate group and the ownership, and I own a business. I get it. It's tough to have to shell out all these dollars for benefits and more pay and all of these things, especially when we didn't get it. When I was younger, companies didn't have that paternity leave and even good maternity leave for the mothers and paid time off and things like that. We still don't have all the laws around that. And so it was interesting because the operational leaders are saying, but the workforce is demanding it. Demanding it. They will not come work for us if we do not have 8 weeks or 12 weeks paid leave, and even a package for the fathers as well, not just mothers. So think about, at your organization, we have to be really, really careful about the way it's always been done, or things that are requested that we say we just can't afford to do it, because in some cases we can't afford not to do it if it's going to keep us from attracting and retaining the people that we need, especially this younger group of workers. So I just encourage everybody to really think differently and be more open-minded. I know it's costly to the organization, but we really have to be more open-minded about what the new workforce is going to not just request, but demand that we have available as organizations. And I myself have increased dramatically our maternity, paternity leave, and even added foster and adoption and, different things like that folks have requested and have brought to my attention. So we have to think differently as organizations and leaders too, if we want to attract these folks. So, I want to hear more about your time working with these younger students, Alayna. How old are the students that you're teaching at UT Dallas, for example? And then can you give us just a couple examples of what you're seeing and hearing from that group? Because I think they are even, dare I say it, more Gen Z than you are. So,
Well said. Yeah. So my group of students, most of them are going to be 18 to 22 years old. But I also I teach in the evening. So I've got some non-traditional students as well. Got a director of operations and a director of IT that are in my evening class. And I would say they're likely millennials. Um, but you were just talking about how these students have access. We're talking about how they have access to information.
mhm.
And I have to admit, I didn't give him as much credit as I wish I had. Just a couple weeks ago, we were talking about employment law. It's an intro to HR class, so employment law makes sense. And I was absolutely shocked to hear that my students had an answer to my question, what employee characteristics are protected under existing employment law? I thought they might say gender, ethnicity, things under our Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And one of the first things that came up across my sections was race-based hairstyles are protected under the Crown Act.
Yes.
And this blew my mind. I said, they don't just know the information, they know the law to go with it. For those of you who don't know, the Crown Act is currently passed, I double checked this morning, in 23 states. So it's a state-based law. But our students were asking, well, I don't know if I'd want to apply for a role in another state because I might be discriminated on based on my hair. And so just some awareness there. And then that only sparked a greater discussion around, well, why is this covered? Why isn't this covered? This group is really curious, and really has a lot of already has formed so much of what they believe to be ethically right or wrong, which we know that that's subjective. But I was just so impressed by my students having this conversation across the classroom.
Yeah. And speaking of subjective, right? People do have a different lens or even a different line in the sand for things like that. And especially we've been teaching for years in a lot of our classes about professionalism is subjective and work ethic is subjective. You think you know what it looks like, but it's actually a little bit different for different folks. Some folks say work smarter, not harder. I don't have to stay late because I automated my processes and
Yeah.
things like that. So there are some differences there. And then also I have been following, and if you guys are not doing this, you should go hunt it down. I am following people on social media, especially on the video based systems, Facebook Reels and TikTok and things like that. I am following people who are speaking directly to young employees to hear what they're saying. And they are telling them about the Crown Act and you can, fight your organization if they discriminate in this way, or you can report this, or did you know that companies have to provide you with XYZ benefits and, different things like that. There's all kinds of people out there who are teaching young people how to negotiate upon their hire and how to make sure they're getting the most benefits possible and really telling folks to push back on that. So one thing that frustrates me as a leader is I feel like every day I'm learning something new that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say or that I wasn't supposed to do or that wait, they don't want to work for somebody like that. Now they want me to be like this. you know and so it's very frustrating to feel like, man, I've got almost 20 years of experience and I still feel like, oh no, I've got to keep changing and keep changing. And something that comes to mind to me is I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm going to say a phrase that is no longer acceptable, publicly acceptable and things like that. Or I am not going to know about the Crown Act. You don't know what you don't know. So I'll learn about these things and kind of feel silly for a minute. But then I remember what Maya Angelou says, which is when you know better, do better. So if you don't know what you don't know, there's a little bit of wiggle room there for for that ignorance, really, of just not knowing things, as long as it's not that you're missing anything legal, for sure. But as the workforce evolves, it's okay to not speak their language and to know everything, but keep learning. Stay curious like they are. Stay curious and continue to listen to them and ask, what is that? And who are you following online? And those kind of things, because then I'm able to continue learning.
Yeah.
And Alayna, did you say that, okay, these students then are in that kind of 18 to 22 range, most
Mhm.
of them. So let's talk for a minute about this emerging adulthood stage of life
Yes.
that those folks are in. They're not only Gen Z, but they're in a very specific stage of life called emerging adulthood. What does that mean?
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's anyone in the age of 18 to 26 falls into this
Yep.
category.
Yeah.
And I would just like to encourage everyone listening. Remember when you were 18? Remember when you were 20? Remember when you were 25? The stuff that you said, probably you've learned, oh, maybe that wasn't the way to approach that. You've learned a little bit more. What were you doing, thinking, planning at this age range? What we know of this emerging adulthood stage is that anyone who falls into this category during that time really wants freedom, choice, and change.
Yep.
And talk about the where were you when, based on when you grew up, there was a different set of pressure on you at that age range. Right now, we don't, it's kind of up in the air. Are we pushing more of the rental lifestyle or the homeowner lifestyle? Is one that, marriage right after college versus not getting married at all. I mean, there's so many things that are shifting. But just when you have when you're going to the place of, I can't believe they just said that, maybe us versus them, they don't know what they're talking about. Just take for a moment, try to build that empathy and remember what you were like at that age, and maybe even the people who helped you grow to where you are now in your career.
Absolutely. And for anybody who doesn't have a clinical background, that age of 18 to 26 is when our prefrontal cortex here, this front part of your brain, is finally settling in. So it is also a biological thing that's happening and hormonal, and all the things that are still changing during that time. So that's why Alayna was saying from 18 to 26, our brains are wired to focus on freedom and choice and change and who am I going to be when I grow up? Where do I want to live? Who do I want to be with? What religion do I want to be? Do I want to work part-time or full-time, at home or at an office? They want to explore all these different options and different lifestyles and all of that. So do not confuse any kind of selfish nature of me from the young Gen Z folks. Don't confuse that with Gen Z. That's just because they're an emerging adult who doesn't have the full prefrontal cortex developed yet. And it's also why we don't have a ton of adult data on Gen Z yet, because most of Gen Z is still in that emerging adult developmental stage as well. So let's not judge them too quickly. But I will say, we got a great question in here from Michael that says, any advice for a millennial like me, that Michael is, who gets frustrated with Gen Z direct reports? He wants to be empathetic, but also wants the younger folks to understand that not everything has an immediate solution and some questions can't be answered by Google and things like that. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. One story comes to mind because I've been the Gen Z direct report that my Millennial and Gen X bosses had to figure out how to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I learned that's so important to me, and I know that it's so important based on the students that I've talked to and my siblings and friends, is understanding the why. Now, this isn't a new concept because millennials, sometimes also known as Gen Y, sometimes called Gen WHY, they were the ones asking a lot of these questions.
Yep.
But you might be tired of hearing that because you've already had to answer all these questions. A leader of mine had asked me, she just hired me for this role, and she asked me, or told me before a meeting, hey, Alayna, make sure that you don't speak up during this meeting. I know that's hard for you, but I need you to stay quiet. I did not ask any follow-up questions, and I was sitting there a little bit, honestly, resentful. I was like, what? She just hired me for this role. I want to share my voice. But I did follow what she said because she made it really clear.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I went and I asked her, and I said, I'm still thinking about this. Um, and I can't get it out of my head. Why did you ask me not to speak during the meeting? And I shared some of my frustration. And she said, the meeting that I was talking about, it's not every meeting, it was the board meeting. And during board meetings, we have to record every single thing that's said. And so the less things that are said, the better for our reporting. And know that you're not a decision maker in that room, right? We've got our board of directors as decision makers. As soon as I knew the why,
Yeah.
that resentment went away. And it was a huge trust builder for us too, because she learned that I really cared about the why. And so then she would tell me before I even asked, hey, I'm going to ask you to do this thing, and here's why. And we continued the rest of our working relationship really positively because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, a word for you, Michael, and others is mentoring. We have seen a decline in mentoring over the years because honestly, we've overloaded people's plates. And I remember when I first came into the work world, similar situation of Cara, you're coming to this meeting to be a fly on the wall, they would call it. You're not coming to participate. I just want you to observe and watch. But they would set that, set that expectation with me, and they would mentor me and say, hey, I want you to hear this meeting so you can learn about the industry and what's going on in other departments and things like that. But I need you to understand your role is just to observe right now and not to be a participant, and explained why and all of that. So I think I feel so bad for younger workers today that just don't get as much mentoring. And not to mention, we've also cut onboarding in most organizations. So we shrank down the onboarding to the minimal compliance only check the box type of things. And then everyone else is too busy for them. So if you get frustrated with folks, or you want folks to hit the mark and they don't even know the mark exists, then that takes communicating those expectations and really mentoring and educating folks, because guess what? They can't read your mind. They don't know the way it's always been done. I've got tons and tons of stories of where I misstepped in my early career. And until someone came to me and said, Cara, keep your shoes on all day. That did not happen because I literally didn't know any better, and they were judging me. But I had no idea because I didn't think it was a big deal. And I had clearly a different definition of professionalism than what they had. So
I love
absolutely.
that
Okay.
story.
So let's talk then about a very serious thing. I had warned Alayna I might come at her with kind of devil's advocate here of, if we've got this a little bit more selfish, more entitled, why, what's in it for me kind of workforce coming in. And we also have found that this younger workforce, because of that exposure and talking to everybody and learning about pay, that is much more transparent today than it's ever been, and learning about workloads, and honestly watching Gen X in particular kind of get taken advantage of, because the baby boomers told the Gen Xers, you stay till the job gets done. It's 40 plus hours a week, you leave your personal drama at the door, and all these mantras that the baby boomers expected from the Gen Xers. Millennials, we have spent, as she said, the last 20 years kind of pushing back on that. And now Gen Z is saying, that ain't going to fly. I mean, we're not even going to entertain sacrificing to that level for an organization, because they saw their Gen X parents, or even baby boomer parents kind of get taken advantage of, or even just stay till the job gets done, and they had to sacrifice so much at home. So I would love to hear, Alayna, your thoughts on, how is an employer supposed to get these workers to take ownership in the job, take pride in the work and want to do a good job and want to get it done. And, what is that new employer-employee relationship going to look like?
You talked a lot about mentorship before, and I think that's really key here, but a little bit more context too. Got to stand up for my Gen Z fellow workers, is that because of the information that we have, we are looking more than any other generation ever has at how much greener the grass is somewhere else. And we all know that it's not always greener. It takes until you go to a couple jobs that you know that. But that's where some of you might even be facing the job hoppers that you have in that 18 to 26 range. And you think, okay, well, I can't even move forward with anything else because I am just hiring back to back. One other thing when we talk about access to information is that these employees have seen in a matter of just a couple years how quickly the workforce could shift, because we had a mass shift to working hybrid, right? So we were taking that little bit of information that we have and thinking, oh, well, obviously a company can change these things quickly. They just don't want to. But your question was about how do we get employees to take ownership and stay until the job gets done?
Mm-hmm.
It's about appealing to the value of that employee. And this is not new. Every single employee, we have our reasons why we work. If you're providing for a family, that might be the main reason, versus when you're a young single person, you don't have a family that you have to provide for. And I know it takes so much time and energy to do this mentorship, but truly, if I were to say one thing, and nothing is true blanket, but one thing, it would be to take that time to ask that employee, hey, what do you really care about? Just ask a lot of questions, be ready to listen. I think in a couple weeks from now, we're really going to need all hands on deck for this big launch that we have. Let's give them a little bit of heads up so we can get their buy-in, right? Are you open to staying for that? Can I count on you? Just asking questions and having those conversations will really help. Is there anything else, Cara, that you think that you've seen with working with other clients
Yeah.
too?
Well, I think in general, some of our business models and some of our business structure of how much we've put on people's plates is just not sustainable.
Mm.
And the previous workforce put up with it, that you were always underwater, you're always understaffed, you're always overloaded. And I can understand you all. I completely understand the chip on your shoulder that has got to be growing by the minute of this is not fair. It's not fair, Alayna, because we had so many people for decades that just had to do what they had to do or what they were told to do, and they weren't allowed to push back or they feared pushing back. And then today we've got this younger group that is, and of course, a lot of millennials are included in this as well, that is pushing back and saying, but we're not going to play that game. And so that business model, that business structure literally doesn't work anymore. I just had a conversation recently with a manufacturing group, or spoke at their conference and had some conversations afterwards. And one gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, Cara, the biggest aha moment I had in your presentation was the fact that we got rid of assistant managers years ago. And now we have put so much on our managers' plates. And we have this new, more needy workforce that needs more onboarding, needs more training, needs more mentoring and hand holding, and just wants to build a stronger relationship with their leaders. And yet our managers are in meetings and they're behind spreadsheets and behind a desk, or, out on the floor covering for people that didn't show up today. And they don't have time for what this new workforce needs. And so he was really excited and driven to go back to his organization and say, bring back assistant managers. That's a big change that they were going to make, is to say, we do need that middle person on the floor between leadership and the front line. So yeah.
I'd love to add something like that. It benefits everyone. So well, you might have a group that's being really loud and saying, in maybe even an entitled way, saying, oh, I'm not staying till the job I'm staying till 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And then I'm going home. It will take time, but it benefits everyone. I mean, imagine how far that company can go. They can still grow. They'll be even more competitive in the market
Yes.
if they get assistant managers back. It's a cost and it'll take some time to fill those roles, but it will help everyone. So just that might be my challenge too, is if you hear something and you think, no, that's not going to happen, or I know more and there's no way that this 25-year-old could even have any perspective, just take one pause and think, could that help us? And not just us, but what is your company mission? What are your values? What are you working towards? It might actually, that idea might fit in really well, maybe not right now, but maybe 5 years from now. And being able to share with your new hire, hey, we've already got our next couple years strategically planned out, but will you remind me about this in a year from now? And just if the answer is no, give a little bit more to explain more there.
Absolutely. So let me talk to our viewers for a second. Which is more important, honestly? The short term, keep your head above water, short term, hit our numbers, keep that owner happy. Yes, I understand that's important, but which is more important, that or the long-term sustainability and success of the organization? Because to Alayna's point, yeah, hiring assistant managers, or another group of mine was a construction group that realized they needed to buy more trucks because they couldn't they couldn't get guys to work 60 to 80 hours a week anymore with the amount of trucks that they needed. They needed the trucks going at all hours and no one was willing to work those crazy shifts. And I told the executives, you got to buy more trucks so you can do shorter shifts at the same time when the workforce wants to work. And yes, that's a cost to them, but then it changes their competitive nature out in the market because now they can run, the proper shifts and they are not understaffed like all of their competitors. They're not having to turn down work that they can't deliver because they can't staff their trucks and things like that. So I just want you to seriously think about this. Is your current business model and business structure and staffing structure and the workloads you have for folks, is it sustainable? Because if you're just thinking that it will solve itself and fix itself over time, do you see Alayna's face right now? It is
No.
not going to get better. And we are not going to all of a sudden find workers that say, sure, I'll work 50 hours a week for 40 hours a week pay. The difference is we somehow convinced this previous workforce that came before today's younger workers that was normal. And I got to tell you, it's not normal. And it's not, more importantly, sustainable. Okay. So, and I know some of you are thinking, but we can't, like, our industry can't do that, or our business can't do that. And I'm telling you, other people around you are doing it. They are making the changes. They are cutting, they are cutting the workloads. They are adding new positions. They're taking the financial hit today so that they can better serve their customers, their clients, their residents, patients, guests, so they can better serve those folks later because they know it has to change.
And as a candidate, I know how to, and I can find that information. You even take one little trend, but many companies, when they go public, right now, they have to do shareholder reports. And I know students of mine that are looking at the shareholder reports before they apply to a company. So it is not a group that doesn't know how to think and research. We're just assuming that they don't know how to think and research. And so with the information that you have now, knowing that they're going to do that research, because they can Google it, they can ask, they can ask ChatGPT, they know how to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we should point out as well that a lot of the clients that we serve at Magnet Culture have a lower wage, hourly frontline workforce, which is, again, different than what I would say is the more professional, degreed, white collar type of workforce as well with Gen Z. So there is also a difference. And there's a difference if we think about their upbringing of, were their parents folks who went to college? Did they hold 40 hours salary type professional jobs behind a desk, or were their parents more hourly workers and have a different career path as well? So there are definitely some differences there. And then as we had someone in the Q&A here also mention, some industries have a lot less flexibility. So healthcare, we work a ton, of course, in senior care and healthcare, construction, manufacturing. I've already mentioned a couple of those clients we have. And we understand that tethered workforce is very different. We have to work harder to attract and retain anyone who's going to be tethered to a certain time and location versus those jobs that are what we call untethered, which is what a lot of young people want today. So that's another part of the business model, that if you're a tethered organization like healthcare, how are you going to compete against DoorDash? And this is a very serious question, because DoorDash lets people work whenever they want and set their own schedule and turn off their schedule anytime they want mid-shift. And we have to attract them in. And older workers, I'll hear them say, well, Cara, last time I checked, that's called a job. When somebody tells you where to be when, well, yeah, that was 20 years ago. Everybody had to be told where to be when for their job. But today that's not true. I literally have friends who live off of running Etsy shops, and another friend who sells Pokemon cards. And I mean, these are jobs. These are real things, influencers online. And I know that seems silly because you're going, well, that's a small percentage of people who can make it work like that. But everybody thinks they have a shot at it. Everybody knows that I can quit today if I'm upset, and I can go make money this afternoon with an untethered job. It might not be as much money or the stability of money, but I can walk out today. And that changes everything, my friends. So we do have to be as flexible as we can. And to answer the question in the chat saying, hey, how can we be flexible if we're something more rigid, like a healthcare entity, for example? And I encourage you, go talk to them. Go ask them, right, Alayna? It's like, go talk to your people and don't make assumptions. Say, what kind of schedules do you want? How would you make this work if you were in my shoes as the department leader or the organization owner? How would you staff this place differently that works for folks?
And ask a range of employees. When Cara and I, this is what most of our conversations are like. This fireside chat is just how Cara and I, we're always talking about this stuff. And we were talking, and I was like, well, yeah, go ask your employee that's always on time, and how are they get here on time, and the person that's been there for longer. And Cara's like, yeah, but most of the employees aren't like them, because that's a little bit me. I'm the one that's going to show up on time. So ask a range. Ask the employee who really is a star player, but also spend a lot of your time asking the employees who you think might leave any second. And the best information you can get is from them directly. We're giving you, though, what we've heard from many different organizations. So hopefully this is a good starting place.
Yeah. So let's talk for a moment about money. Older generations tell me, well, I was told not to talk about money and politics and religion, and it's rude to ask how much this job pays and things like that. It was a whole different time back then. And of course, we've since realized through reporting that there are gender differences and race differences, and that there's not always pay equity out there. So you've got these younger generations that are demanding more pay transparency. And I'll be the first to tell you, I do not think everyone should know what everyone else makes. It simply brings too much resentment and animosity and comparison and all that. So I'm not a fan of just 100% transparency of that, but we do see that a lot of states are requiring pay ranges on the job descriptions now, for example, and certainly Gen Z is wanting to know that pay right up front. And so why is it, do you have any thoughts on why is it that Gen Z in particular is really pushing to make a buck more an hour? Not that that's always the reason people leave, because a lot of times it's lack of leadership or, bad culture and things like that. But if it is about money, why is that such a big deal right now? Why is that coming to the forefront?
Well, I think the first is what I talked about with my students talking about employment law. There's a greater awareness to, like you said, Cara, differences in gender, race, ethnicity, and so many other characteristics getting paid differently. So there's already a bit of this focus on, well, I want to be paid equitably. And that's a word that we've known our whole growing up. It's not a new word to us.
No, we didn't
This,
say that word 15 years ago.
no,
We just did it.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And then the other, and this is from a college perspective, this might be different for students not in the college space, but since my first day on a college campus, I was being taught on attend this workshop to learn how to negotiate your salary. So I
Yes.
was told by my mentors and people above me that negotiating salary is the most important skill that you need to learn to get the job that you want. But then the next question is why, you said, why is there such a focus on money? And I think that we saw millennials, we saw our mentors follow their dreams, rack up a
Yay.
lot of debt,
Oh,
and not be able to afford homes. So we want money
right.
so that we can live the life they worked their butts off and didn't get what we thought was equitable for working their butts
Mhm.
off. So, well, shoot, we're going to ask for that.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay. I have to talk a little bit more about that because let's put ourselves into a few different shoes here for a minute.
Okay.
There were some millennials who did buy homes at the right time and were somehow able to do that. Either they didn't have student debt or they, were able to manage that with their student debt. They got into homes at the right time, right before housing prices skyrocketed, and then they won the equity game. Okay. There is a chunk of millennials who were able to do that. But there are a ton of millennials out there who, to your point, like their parents said, follow your dreams, just be happy, don't be miserable in your career like I have been for 30 years. And so I have a ton of friends as well who did want to follow their dreams and they got jobs that paid less than other careers and or they were starving artists and those types of things. And that's great. But then some of my friends tell me, Cara, I missed the home ownership window because if you didn't buy 10 years ago, then now you miss the boat. And it is so hard today in most markets for young people, even under 40, under 45 to purchase a home, especially because rent prices, you guys, rent is insane now. I mean, I remember paying $700 back in the day for a 2-bedroom townhouse that is now $2,000 a month for that same space. And so how can they possibly save any money? Or how can they possibly live in a nice, safe area to raise their kids if they're a lower wage worker, for example? In fact, another gentleman I met at last week's conference, he was talking in the hallway with some friends and I joined in and he said, I walked in on my 16-year-old talking to his buddies the other day. And he said, Cara, you're not going to believe what they were talking about. They were talking about how quickly they can become homeowners of their first starter home to get into the equity game because they understand that they've got to start building wealth now. Like this is what they're learning again on TikTok and Facebook, or not on Facebook, Instagram, right? I watch Facebook Reels, but they watch Instagram. And so it's just a whole different mentality, okay?
Yeah.
And just different exposure, and it comes down to what's happening when they're in their formative years, which is people can't afford their first house anymore. If you're renting, it's almost impossible to switch from being a renter to buying because you can't save up a down payment anymore. Okay.
Mhm.
So that type of stuff really does matter, and getting to know your younger workers and what drives them and why is money important or is it not the most important factor. It's not the most important factor for everybody, but it's certainly climbing the ladder again just because of the cost of living that we have here in the
Mhm.
States. So awesome. Okay. So, final question for you, Alayna. All
Okay.
right. Is how are companies now supposed to meet the needs of our customers if we know that the new workforce is not going to want to work overtime, much of it at all, or certainly not paid? I mean, not if they're not paid, so unpaid overtime. They are less patient and less tolerant than previous generations, right? Less experienced, of course, that they may not be even just as fast or efficient and productive in their roles. We also are lacking some critical thinking skills, which we actually just did a webinar last month. If you guys missed the decline of critical thinking, I did a whole webinar on that. You can check that out at youtube.com/magnetculture. So if we know that these things are happening with this newer workforce, and we need more training, more mentoring, more supervision, more management and oversight for leading these folks, what are we supposed to do as organizations now? I mean, we've given some insights here, but do you have some final thoughts on that?
The only wrong answer is to not do anything. I think I'll start with that, because no matter, we don't know the industry of every single person watching this. We don't know the unique challenges of your workplace. But to go back to what you had said earlier, Cara, is we have to recalibrate to something that is more sustainable. Our business model, I mean, all the things you just listed are things that are inherent in our business model, that we have customers who need whatever we are selling them. We have employees who only want to do the work if they know what's in it for them. I would say with this, if you haven't gotten it this whole time, the wake up call is that if you don't focus on shifting these things now, you will be behind later. And honestly, you might already be a little bit behind. It might be what you're feeling as a company because you can't get the talent that you want at the time that you need it for the price that you want it. So just consider what maybe your audience is. So is it that you're trying to hire Gen Z employees for your frontline work? Or is it that you're really trying to work with your millennials? A lot of these strategies can work across the board, but you have to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that recalibrate is the key word that I've been talking with so many executives about. We cannot keep doing things the way it's always been done, because that's just not going to get us the talent that we need to serve our customers. Okay. So we have to recalibrate and have a very real conversation and real analysis of, does our current business model, the financial model and the staffing structure, does that work? And how are we going to compete against the organizations down the street, whether they're in our industry or not in our industry? How are we going to compete for that battle for talent as folks continue to hop around and look around? And another piece of the puzzle is this 3%. If you are budgeting 3% pay increases every year, that is not a raise. That is a cost of living adjustment. So quit blaming the people for job hopping when all you're giving them is a cost of living adjustment. They will never be able to better their lives and get into a nicer apartment or a nicer neighborhood, get a more reliable car. They can't move up in the world and level themselves up if they don't get a real raise. I was just talking to a brewery owner the other day who said, oh, well, we give 4 to 5. That's good, right? So we're above 3. And I said, yeah. Are you still losing people? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, then you might want to budget for 6 next year. And I know they run a great cultural organization and she's a great leader and everything, but she did say that her industry is getting more competitive and they're stealing talent for more money. So I just told her, like, your next budget, think differently. Think differently of how you want to reward those people, truly recognize that 365 days of hard work that folks are putting into the job. And hopefully after 365 days, they're getting better and faster at the job and they're actually more valuable to you and they have more competencies in their role as well, which then provides better customer service of what you're providing, whether you make widgets or you're providing service. Hopefully your customers win in the end as well. So I'll tell you, the companies who get this right and who have these difficult conversations and make these changes over the next 3 to 5 years, they will be the ones who will win and will be profitable in 10 years because they've made these shifts. So